From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
And hello again. Well, schools are on our minds this week, and I'm reminded of a very elementary and high school graduation where somebody admonishes the graduates that this might feel like the end of something, but actually it's only the beginning. And that's exactly how the teachers' strike feels right now, at least to me. The strike's over, but the questions that it raised and the serious issues that it put on the table have ignited a furious debate right in the middle of the Democratic Party. At least it seems that way. We've come to expect Republicans to, lecture us on how everything should be run like a business and that there's no problem that can't be solved by counting the widgets and paying the workers less. But when a leading Democrat, one who's, this close to the President of the United States and he's a big city mayor, has kind of generally agreed to be bullying the teachers, then you see that there may be some clouds on the horizon. So maybe it was just inevitable that it would be Chicago, home of the first teachers union, the first city to give its mayor the dictatorial control of the schools, the home of Arnie Duncan, the home of POTUS. Kind of inevitable that it might be Chicago that would draw the line in the sand and call the public's attention to decades of systemic disinvestment in the public schools, and at least make the argument that cookie cutter approaches like test worship and school turnarounds, they're not working as well as maybe they should. And maybe that what they're doing is they're draining the life out of traditional public schools. So, oh, by the way, while we're on the subject, those hunks of support from police squadrons and ambulances and hook and ladder trucks, they weren't just votes of solidarity. That was union members. Those were union members whose own contracts are expired, feeling a little more confident that they're ready to prepare for their battle with Mayor Rahm Emanuel. So it all forces the question, was this strike historic? Did it redefine the labor movement in a time when labor movements have been given up for dead? Will scholars discuss this strike 50 years from now or 20 years from now in a significant shift in the labor movement? We needed help to answer that, so we have invited a distinguished scholar in the field today. He's with the School of Labor and Employment Relations at the University of Illinois. Steven Ashby, thank you very much for joining us, and thanks for being on the show today. And to help us figure out everything that happened in detail, we had to turn to two of our old friends from Catalyst Chicago. Not one, but two. Lorraine Forte is here, and so is Sarah Karp. So a distinguished panel right here on the program today. And Professor, we turn to you first. Are you going to be teaching this strike 10 years from now, 15 years from now? Will it be significant?
Absolutely, I think so.
Why so?
Well, it's hard to predict history. In 1929 in the summer, pundits and politicians declared we're in for decades of labor peace. Mm-hmm. A few years later, we had citywide general strikes in 1934 in 3 major cities, and a couple years later, the auto workers occupied their plants, which led to 14.5 million workers organized by 1945. So it's hard to predict history. We kind of have seen some pundits, particularly now on the anniversary of Occupy, write it off. It was a one-time thing, it didn't have an impact. Wisconsin, it was a one-time thing that's unique to Wisconsin, and they lost the recall. Kind of forgetting about Ohio, where 61% of the people overturned the Republican governor's anti-union referendum. So we could also write off the teachers' strike, but I think you would do so incorrectly. I think these three events go together. We're seeing a beginning of an upsurge in this country. I know teachers across the country have watched this extremely closely because teacher union after teacher union have caved in, have not mobilized their membership, have given them deep concessions, and they're looking at Chicago and saying, why don't we do what they did in Chicago?
Yeah. It was interesting. I think we all were probably at the Union Park rally on Saturday and watching what was going on there. And it really was kind of moving to see the number of people who came from other teachers' unions or sent messages from other unions to say, wow. I think that's basically what their message was wow. There is a feeling that something might be happening here, but it's very difficult to figure out where it goes from here because there is even some debate about whether this, I know Lorraine, we were talking a little earlier, is this really a war within the Democratic Party?
Well, I'm certainly not a political expert. I do agree that yes, this will be remembered, and it does seem certainly like a trend toward more union power. I don't you know, just my own observation, I don't know. I know there was talk of, oh, you know, will this hurt the president in his reelection effort? The president never weighed in one way or another on the strike, and why, you know, really, why should he? Yes, he's from here, but it is a local issue, and let the mayor
since Mitt
solve it.
Romney has joined his campaign team, maybe he just doesn't seem to care about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it certainly it didn't help the mayor to you know, with constituents to see, you know, two Republicans weighing in on his side in this strike. I mean, that was certainly no help to him. But I personally don't see how the strike, especially now since it's settled and the union won, would have, you know, really a deciding impact on whether someone does or does not vote for the president.
Now you just blew that line off. The union won. Did the union win?
I think in the balance and in public perception and in the balance of what they got, they were able to get 90%, way over the 75% they needed to strike. They got support from people across the country, other union members. So I think, yeah, that they're perceived on balance to have gotten more than what the mayor did. Now, not to say that the district and the mayor didn't get some of what they wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I heard the mayor just minutes afterward saying that this was a big victory for him. That this was exactly what he wanted.
Of course, both sides are going to claim victory. And one thing that I do think is interesting is that, you know, everybody says, oh, well, they kept the longer school day. They were going to have that regardless.
That had already been decided.
Right, the state law.
That's
not a, you know, they can't claim that.
But
as
Sarah,
a victory.
did the union win at the bargaining table?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be a while for us to tell whether the provisions in the contract actually are better for the union than would have been had they settled a week before. I think the big win for the union was that the contract is only 3 years with a 1-year extension for two big reasons. One, okay, they don't extend it. They say we're not gonna accept an extension. It's right at the middle. It's right at the precipice of Emmanuel's next re-election campaign if he decides to run again. So he's got to be nice to them. That's a big deal. Second of all, with teacher evaluation, this is a little bit more complicated. With teacher evaluation, the district agreed to do the state minimum for 3 years. They wanted to increase it in the 4th and 5th year, the amount that test scores weighed into teacher evaluation.
State requires 30%, is that right?
Right, 25, 30, 30. But CPS has said they plan to do 40, to get up to 40, 45 in the years after. But now they're going to have to go back to the Chicago Teachers Union and say, you know, can we do this? And today I was reading in the Sun-Times that Karen Lewis, when she heard that they still are planning on doing more than the state minimum, she said, well, then I guess we'll have to not extend the contract.
Right.
I think that they, one of the things about if you signed a 4-year contract is that it took the union out of the conversation. And the big thing about the way this contract is that they are still going to be in the conversation.
And the other thing, sorry, Stephen, the other thing that the conversation extends is the issue of the school closings, which of course we'll talk about that maybe a little later. But that's massive, and if they had a 4-year locked in, then they could be doing a lot of school closings that the CTU wouldn't have much to say about. So we'll talk about that. I'm sorry, interrupted you, sir.
Well, I'm a labor studies professor. I'm an advocate of workers' rights. I'm an advocate of unions. But oftentimes, when unions are defeated, they all claim victory. So I can be very critical of unions. I've written a book that's extremely critical of some international unions. In this case, I think it's a decisive victory for the union.
Okay.
The mayor wanted 20% unpaid labor. That got pushed back to 3 or 4%. That was huge. He wanted a 7.5-hour day. It got pushed back to 7 hours. He wanted an increase in health care costs. He lost that. It's a free, every union across the country. He has to hire 600 new teachers. Half of the new hires have to be experienced teachers. I was surprised the only press conferences he did and Broussard did were with principals. And it was, we need absolute control. I will not budge on this issue. The unstated sentiment is the principals need to be able to hire teachers straight out of college with only a bachelor's degree that we can pay $48,000 a year instead of seasoned teachers who are laid off with a master's degree and 20 years in the system that they're going to pay $70,000 a year.
And teachers,
and they lost on that.
Teachers has been
The
pointed
teachers
out,
won.
who are more in tune with the kind of the modern way of thinking about how school should be done, instead of these sort of older, seasoned people who reflect back into the civil rights era and that sort of thing.
And he lost on merit pay. That was a big issue for him.
That was a very
He
big
lost
issue.
on
That's
steps
true.
and lanes, which is
that was
periodically
big.
with your
Yeah,
experience you get
exactly.
paid
That's
more,
very
and if
big.
you have a master's degree or education. I think it's a small thing perhaps, but the fact that the board had to put in the contract, we will get books to our students and teachers on the first day, thereby admitting what the union had been saying, that oftentimes it's 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks before you have books. And point after point, there were some concessions, but point after point the union won.
Could we, go ahead.
And then also there was a lot of support for parents, from parents. And you have a poll, with like 2/3 of people thinking the mayor was at fault for the strike to begin with, and siding with teachers and parents on picket lines.
Well, one of the things that we heard repeatedly from Mayor Emanuel was the thing that as he kind of backed off, but he was saying, the thing that is most important to me is that the principal has to have control of the building. This is critical. If we want excellence, the principal is in charge of excellence. The principal has to be able to choose her own staff, and blah 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 blah. But you have written. In your excellent piece in Catalyst not too long ago, just a few weeks ago, about the churn in the central office, you say, and I'm just going to quote you back to you, Sarah Karp, CPS employee rosters show a high turnover in principals at a time when a pension enhancement program made retirement attractive for many veterans. Between 2010 and 2012, 341 principals, or 44%, which is close to half, of all of the principals left their jobs. That's what Karen Lewis was talking about. She was saying that the shelf life of a principal is 4 years. What are you talking about?
Yeah, a teacher is more likely to be sticking around at a school than a principal.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We're at a point where a lot of the principals are aging, and so they are retiring. There's some natural retirement, but there's also been there's a lot of pressure on principals. Under Huberman, I remember his big thing was like, oh, if you can't improve a school in a year, then you need to get out. And some of that, I'm sure, pushed some people out the door, because how quickly can you really improve a school? So it's not as if we have all these really experienced principals that are going to be making these decisions. So I think that was one of the issues. Though I think if you come to Rahm Emanuel's thinking, they're trying to train principals. They have this big training program.
Right, they do.
And the principals, I went to one of those round tables with principals all saying like, well, the biggest thing I need is autonomy. It goes into a larger philosophy that Rahm Emanuel and this whole sort of education world has called, we're supposed to be a portfolio school district, which means that
we want to talk about, because I don't have any idea what that means, but yeah.
So, we actually have signed on to this, and we're like on a website. One of the portfolio school districts in the United States is Chicago Public Schools, and we're a big dog. So, but one of the parts of that is that ultimately what they'd like to see is each school run like a charter school. So whether it's technically run by the school district or technically run by a private organization, each principal has a lot of autonomy. What Brizard calls it is bonded autonomy, which kind of sounds a little weird to me, but it's like, but
That would be a different website. Yeah.
I know, that's right. But so, anyways, that's one of the big issues. This is an ideological issue that principals should have a lot of power, and we leave it up to them. And then when they fail, we just close the school.
So was this a subtext that the teachers understood that a lot of us didn't understand? That when the mayor is saying principal autonomy, he's actually saying he wants the principals to have the same power that principals at charter schools have, that they can just hire and fire at will? And
I think the word autonomy, the teachers understand, is either being dictatorship or non-union. The charter drive, as far as they're concerned, is ideologically driven to get rid of the union. To get rid of all seasoned and experienced teachers who pay more, and to have no teacher voice in curriculum and discussion on how to run the school.
And
They want absolute control.
Yeah, and as a result, there are a handful of charters that have formed their own union because they felt like they had no voice, and teacher turnover is extremely high in charters, higher than in traditional public schools. So there's kind of a small, very small movement toward unionizing in some charter schools.
It is. And they were very supportive of the strike. I do want to mention, though, it's not like all teachers hate their principal. Actually,
no, I don't.
Large numbers of teachers like their principal.
Right.
At the we had just before
I
the
think that's
strike
a very important
protest
point
at
to make.
Sojo High School, and the principal had been fired, who the local school council had a part in hiring, and the parents and the teachers were in an uproar. There was a student strike over it. They wanted the principal back. So there are beloved principals.
Oh yeah. I mean, teachers will go. Teachers. I mean, there have been polls that have shown teachers will take less pay if they can go to a school where they really like the principal and
they're treated as partners.
Right, and treated as.
I don't want to get. I don't want to get
Yes,
too far away though from this conversation about this churn article that you did in the central office, because my memory may be foggy because we did get a lot of stuff thrown at us in the last 72 hours, but I'm pretty sure I heard Mayor Emanuel reiterate at that press conference where they were all standing in front of the World Book Encyclopedia, which I thought was just a pretty weird visual, and whoever was responsible for that press conference, that was bad. I mean, it's like, here we are, the modern Chicago public schools, and the superintendent is standing in front of the World Book. Anyway, beside the point. He said $75 million, he had cut $75 million from the central office. Now, you've written that the central office is really not different. It's not different in size than it was before, right? A lot of people have left. There's massive churn.
Right.
What's
There's
going on?
different faces there, a lot of different faces. But actually, from this year to last year, I think, well, from what the budget books show, that they're actually putting $50 million more into central office than they did last year.
50.
Right. But here's the thing. What I suspect is that he is conflating central office, citywide, which is like the place where social workers and nurses and all these citywide employees, and then there's facilities, and so I think he's taking all the cuts that had nothing to do, that are not school level cuts, and sort of putting them together, and then you might be at around, I really don't think it's up to 75 million, but I think that you might be up to like 55 million, but there's a big fallacy there, because when I hear central office, I'm thinking about 125 Clark. I'm not thinking, because the people in citywide and the people in facilities, these are engineers, lunch ladies, social workers,
so an engineer
nurses.
at a school counts as central office?
Well, I think he must be. I mean, the only way I could see, and who knows? I mean, who knows the mind of Rahm Emanuel? If he just thinks the stuff up, or if he is given some basis of he heard somebody say it once and then he decides he can say it. I don't know where that number comes from. And we couldn't ask any questions at that press conference, so we couldn't ask him where that number came from. So, but the only way I could see it having any basis in reality is by combining all those different.
He also said that the cost of this contract is going to be $74 million a year. So we've been wondering how much it was going to cost, and he gave us a number, 74, but as you say, didn't take any questions on that. And that's compared to, he says, $129 million a year that the contract was costing before. So he just, by negotiating this great contract that he was victorious negotiating, he just saved the city of Chicago, whatever that was, $70 million or $60 million or something. Now, of course, I don't understand the CPS budget, and I don't know anybody who does, so maybe it's true. But I thought it was interesting that, wasn't it just this spring that CPS gave the Chicago Police Department $75 million for security that the Chicago Police Department didn't ask for? So maybe they could go back to the police department and ask for that $75 million back, and voila, we're in good shape, right?
And truthfully, looking at the Chicago Public School budget, which is, it's as much, it's sort of fantasy, that whole budget, because you never know where these numbers come from. You get like projected enrollment that has no basis in reality. So it's really kind of a crazy document. But it can't be hard for them to find $75 million. I mean, I've been covering the Chicago Public School District for long enough to see $400 million deficits, disappear in like a night, and and because they decided they're going to turn off the lights at night or something like that, and you're like, oh, that was an easy solution, but it's true. So I really can't imagine that $75 million. They're going to make a big deal. I mean, over the next week. Maybe they're going to wait a month, but they're going to have to adjust the current budget, and they're going to make a big deal out of how they're going to find the money.
Yeah.
But truthfully, it's not going to be that hard.
All right, Steven Ashby, you were kind of sort of inside this. I mean, you actually were a consultant to CTU in some ways, right? So you have a kind of a sort of inside and outside view of this. It seems to me, as things went on, that more and more I began to believe that it was, well, there were so many issues that were, what do you think was the thing that hung them up on over the weekend, where we saw the Sunday night thing kind of fall apart, and then there was a couple of days in there? What was the reason that the House of Delegates did not vote or voted no or whatever it was they did on Sunday night? What happened?
Well, the leadership on Thursday and Friday were quite exhausted from nonstop bargaining. Came away for the first time very optimistic, and I think some of the language they used led people across the city, including teachers, to believe that everything was really heading rapidly towards a settlement. But when the delegates met, they were very disappointed they don't have the actual contract language. I think Karen Lewis on Thursday said the lawyers are just going to meet and finalize it, but come Sunday, there's still a 23-page summary, and some of the issues were still not finalized, some key issues. So that's part of it. And I think part of it, too, why they send it to the members for discussions. Part of it, too, is this union is not the union it was 2 years ago. This is, new leadership came in, the Caucus of Rank and File Educators, in a five-way election. And they had begun as an organizing, fighting school closing, because their union leadership was not doing it. And they had begun mobilizing with the community and parents groups. So they had a lot of outreach, and they had an activist membership. It was not just an electoral slate, it was an activist social movement type of group. And they began this organizing model to transform their union. And I worked with, I was part of the team, just one member, that organized the contract campaign over the last year. Every school, a committee was organized. Every member was in touch with that committee. If you weren't wearing a red shirt on Friday, there are going to be some conversations to what are your concerns, let's talk. Every member's opinion was valued, and it just transformed this, step by step, it transformed this union. This is the most activist teachers union in the country.
Yeah.
So when they went on strike,
it was not that, I mean, 2 or 3
the
years
mayor
ago.
should have seen this. 6,000 teachers on May 23rd. 92% of the members turning out to vote after he had helped pass Senate Bill 7, lifting the ante that no other union has to 75% of the members voting instead of 50% plus one of those who do vote. And they blew that away. Step by step he should have seen, but apparently he didn't see. This is not your typical labor union.
Right.
This is an activist union.
He had had so many victories with streets and sanitation and others, who, gradually sort of peeling them away, using this same kind of tactic, I think, of coming in and making very strong statements, some would say bullying, about you have too much time for preparation on your truck at the beginning of the day, and then having the unions kind of like, kind of softly melt away. He probably thought the same thing was going to happen here. But
so on Sunday, the big bargaining team, there were 30 other members, met before the delegates meeting, and they said, we don't have the contract language, and you know what? You, the leadership, have been telling us for 2 years the members run this union. Well, we're not ready to vote yet. We want to see what the members think.
So it wasn't...
They voted 2-1 to send it to the members. The delegates endorsed that, the 800 plus delegates. And actually, it was a huge exercise in democracy. I mean, I traveled around the schools, and every school there's a circle of teachers discussing, everyone has a chance to speak as long as it takes, discussing what is the contract, what did we gain, what did we lose, should we continue to strike, will we hold on to support from the parents? It was a truly democratic experience.
I think in the news media there was a little bit of a buzz on Sunday night that maybe there's trouble, that you know, there's like a rump rebellion within the House of Delegates. But what you're saying is that's not true. It was,
not true.
And so that would help explain how, when they did come to the vote on Tuesday, It was overwhelming.
It was overwhelming.
So some pretty decent union organizing.
Some phenomenal union organizing.
Yeah, I guess so. So one of let's move on to the thing that I was going to start to ask you a little bit before, which was the thing about teacher closings. It started occurring to me at some point that the issue that they're really more freaked out than anything about is this thing of how many schools are going to close. We do have to close schools, right? Do we?
Yes.
Well,
we're under-enrolled if we ever want to solve our structural problem. I mean, it's not a natural phenomenon. This has been caused by charter schools and by, you know, just, there are some neighborhoods where there has been a decrease in enrollment, but the under-enrollment of schools has been exacerbated by charter schools. So yeah, I mean, if we have a lot of schools, like 300 schools that have less than 300 kids in the school, and that economically is a very big, you know, cost.
But it's not all, as you point out, just because we're losing population. I mean, we're not losing that much population. A lot of it is that the schools are being depopulated because of the Board of Education's own policies.
Right, and that's why the school closings, while at the same time the district has said we're going to open, you know, 60 more charter schools, the two of them together are really what, you know, has got the union revved up for another fight. And then parents' anger and you know, they see their neighborhood school closed, and maybe it's like the last functioning institution in some poor community, and now it's going to be gone, and they're going to have to figure out what to do next.
So real quick question here. I was watching a lot of television during this, and you could not get away from the TV commercials. All through the strike, every station in Chicago was plastered with these commercials. How much money was spent and who spent it? Does anybody know?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know how much money was spent, but I'm, you know, everything I've been led to believe is by this Democrats for Education Reform, which is, it's a local chapter of a national group that is funded by, you know, venture capitalists, I believe.
And foundations.
Wealthy business people.
Right, not like philanthropic foundations. It's more like, you know, the Bruce Rowners of the world than it is the Chicago
Well, I
Community
mean,
Trust.
I know a little something, I think we all do, about how much it costs to buy a commercial on a TV station in Chicago, and especially during like the 10 o'clock news and that, and to pretty much just roadblock the way they were doing, that cost a lot of money. And I was just wondering if maybe somebody thought about maybe saying, hey, how about we put that money and we air condition 5 schools in Chicago? Maybe it would have had more impact, I don't know.
It's an interesting part of the story that you have all these hedge fund managers. Apparently they think privatizing schools is a good place to invest. People like Bruce Rauner. He has a charter school named after him, right?
Noble
He's a big investor. Advance Illinois, Stanford Children, Democrats for Education Reform, they're all billionaire-backed organizations. They are not grassroots organizations. They all have leading Democrats pushing this agenda to charterize
We're going to
schools.
have to take that up another time, I'm sorry to say, because we've just run out of time. But thank you, all three of you, so much. It was a very interesting discussion today. And I can't let the show close without noting that this is our 100th broadcast of Chicago Newsroom. And I'm very proud that we've been around for a couple of years. When the credits roll, take a look at the names of all the people scrolling up the screen, because they've all been with the show for 2 years and they've done a great job. Thank you very much. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom, as you always have. You can watch it right here on cable or see it anytime you want. You can check us out on iTunes, and we will see you next week back here on Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks for watching.